Bungalow Bill here. We've got a northeaster cranking through Boston right now, so I've decided to get back to some From the Depths content. Recently, I was reading the Discord and somebody asked, are there any good Onyx Watch ships? Which someone else responded to, the Javelin. And my response, of course, was, the what? So, the Javelin is a medium difficulty Onyx Watch ship, which it does not seem to be in here. Oh dear, they must have put it into the wrong category. Which, well, a little bit of a snarky response is my opinion of it. So, let's load the ship up, look what's inside it, see how we can beat it, and see what we can learn from it. Here I have spawned in the Javelin on my own side so that I can pull it apart. It is predominantly a huge missile vehicle. So, as per other Onyx Watch missiles, a lot of explosive warheads. It is not terribly maneuverable. The range and speed is not phenomenal for a missile this size, which means it's really terrible. So, like other Onyx Watch vehicles, you can hard counter this with speed and evasiveness. Has prediction guidance, so some ability to hit steady craft that are moving moderately fast, but fast and dodgy planes, absolutely no hope at hitting. Active Radar Seeker, and so I don't know the exact Onyx Watch guidelines for ships because despite the large numbers of rules that they have, I have not been able to find a list anywhere, and when prompted, people who frequent the Onyx Watch section of the Discord will say that the rules are not sufficiently consistently enforced to actually have a list of them, but I believe no remote guidance and no signal processors is a pretty big one. Perhaps no one-turns as well. If you want to build a missile like this yourself and have it work without signal processors, and even with signal processors you should do this, you should put a one-turn on it, and you should put a guidance activation delay on it to give it enough time to aim towards the target, because missiles will attribute a stronger signal to things that are closer to their nose. So if your missile is already pointed at the target, it'll be less likely to aim at another craft. So, while I wouldn't recommend using missiles exactly like this, because they're not terribly flexible, against the right craft, so things that do not have flares with radar simulators on them, and craft that aren't that evasive, these can do a lot of work. However, they aren't terribly well protected. So, similar to sort of why I said I think that the Caldera, which I recognize that I spelled incorrectly, that I built is a medium difficulty vehicle. Well, this one has some of the same flaws, that these missiles are relatively exposed above the waterline. There could be a very large amount of bulk and usefulness in hiding things under the waterline. Again, similar to the Caldera, it's not done. There is some stone around the AI compartment, and for some reason the ammo compartment as well. I believe this is, yes, the ammo compartment, although I was of the belief that ammo is not, that's not the right button, that ammo is not subject to AI pulses. I don't see any EMP susceptibility here. This craft does not entirely rely on missiles. There are some small guns on it. There are these two small anti-aircraft cannons that are APS, and there's one CRAM cannon. Now, these guns are terrible, and it's not the Javelin's fault. These are standardized Onyx Watch CRAMs. There's been a thread on the Discord where people have been rebuilding these CRAMs, and it looks like they're doing very good work, so I hope they actually make it into the game. Because I could see you putting sort of this type of Tetris maybe into an easy vehicle. It definitely doesn't belong in a godly, which I do think that if they re-Tetris all of the CRAMs, it might make some of the lower difficulty vehicles a bit too good, particularly if an optimized version of this goes into an EasyCraft, it is still a deck gun. This APS is potentially worse. I do not know if these are getting rebuilt or not. So it has a few issues. One is that it has no ammo ejectors. If ammo ejectors aren't allowed, well, that's kind of excusable. Especially without defuses, there's really no point in ammo ejecting something like this. And even if ammo ejectors are allowed, which I think they might be in one or two Onyx Watch craft, one of the new... I think the Parapet has them. It must have defuses because the ammo ejectors wouldn't work given its gun geometry. So hopefully for higher difficulty craft, something like this can be built so that it doesn't pop. It is small enough, though, that you can kind of say, yeah, it's going to be disabled if it gets hit anyway, so it's fine having it pop. However, APS components are sufficiently tough that I like having them be defused anyway, because they can act as armor even once the gun is dead. You don't need to blow a huge hole in your ship. But the shell, it's timed HE flak. It's not very good. It's not a fast shell, and this HE flak means that it doesn't have good explosive radiuses on it. It's also, the Tetris is, don't copy this Tetris. It is a mix of 1-clip and 2-clip Tetris. And then what must be intentional is you can see gauge coolers through the top, which isn't great. I also don't think the turret looks very good either, so I really hope that these get redone, but it's obviously not the fault of the craft using a standardized turret. And to some extent, at some point, I think these were considered like okay, especially for a campaign vehicle, but sort of from the depths as the player community and the quality of the campaign vehicles has kind of moved on. As far as the overall looks of the Javelin, well, to some extent, I don't actually feel that it looks that much like an Onyx Watch craft. I don't think aesthetics are really my forte, though, so it's not sort of the thing that I should have that much focus on. Now, the Javelin's slow. So, like other Onyx Watch craft, not hydrodynamic. But look at that engine power. That's a phenomenal amount of engine power. So, what's responsible for that? Well, a 3-stage large steam engine. It has about 3 times the amount of boilers that it actually needs to run at this incredibly low load. To actually run at a higher load, it'd probably need more, but there's nothing on this ship that actually uses that much power. Right, so I believe there are a total of 4 turning props. And then, similarly, we've got roll props, and we've got pitch props. So that's 10 of these large propellers. Likely only 5 of them are going to run at the same time. Even if all 10 run, that's only 4,000 power draw. And then, this, I don't remember exactly how much these propellers can use. It's not very much. 1,200. Right, so about 5,000 power draw maximum. Now, this engine is unloaded, so it's reporting much higher stats than it can actually use. But it can probably produce about 100,000 engine power. Let's load it up, actually, and see how it does. Maybe a little bit less. It's like... only 5 to 10% of its capacity could ever possibly be used. Oh man, that's actually a much worse engine than I thought it was. Well, alright, about 25% of its capacity can actually be used. I was used to... I think there was a time when steam engines actually reported exactly double of their max power generation when they were unloaded. Now, apparently, for a very bad steam engine, that can be quite a bit higher. I think sort of my estimate was correct, though, for a more optimized steam engine. This steam engine is not very good. I would not recommend building one like this. And this actually, under full load, it actually uses all of its boiler. The fact that the steam engine is in here makes me suspect that the Javelin may have had shields at some point. Shields or lambs that were stripped off of it. That would make some amount of sense. I still wouldn't use an engine like this you can sort of justify it to reduce the number of components, but I still wouldn't do a 3-stage 1-to-1-to-1 regardless. Okay, so that's my quick tour of the Javelin. I should also bring up her stats, actually. So about 500 total firepower, very lightly armored for Onyx Watch, and she has no active defenses. So let's drop in a few other vehicles to sort of demonstrate how to counter her. Now, since she does share sort of the same weaknesses as other Onyx Watch vehicles, I'll leave out the fast flyers and that sort of thing, and focus on vehicles that bring other counters. There are basically two ways that you can beat her if you're not using a large amount of speed. To some extent, I find that getting into a slugfest with Onyx Watch vehicles is a lot of fun. So I don't like to counter them as much as I used to. I used to just destroy them with flyers that they couldn't fight back against. I still do that sometimes, but not quite as much as I used to. So let's spot in the Kitakami. And what the Kitakami has that will work very well here are flares. So missiles already going up, and all the missiles are going up. I do not see EMP pulses coming out. I was under the impression that the Kitakami had EMP something. I thought it was EMP missiles. EMP is actually fairly effective against the Javelin. We just lost almost all of our engine power. I don't know if that actually ruptured all the way through. Yes, it did. I was unsure if it was heat or not. So you can see this is a very delicate floor to this craft. And we are losing components at the bottom very quickly. I already see some processing power jumping out, which makes me think that there are probably EMP pulses that I'm missing. These missiles are quite delicate. And since they're not remote guidance, with remote guidance, we're down to 0 engine power, so we can't even turn anymore. With remote guidance being further back in the missile, as soon as they lose any component anywhere in the missile, they have absolutely no guidance. One of the strengths of missile craft that I think makes them really overpowered. Looks like there's some heat missiles too. Those are yellow fragments, which sort of explains how we're getting eviscerated so quickly. But one of the strengths of missiles that I think makes them kind of overpowered is how resilient they can be. If you really bury them into a craft, they're way tankier and way more resilient than APS because they're way less exposed. When you take that strength away, I think they become fairly subpar. Well, you can already see how this is going. The Kitakami is probably at like 99, 98%, 100. Okay, yeah, barely not scratched. So any craft with any level of flares is almost totally immune. Now, this crab cannon could be made almost twice as strong as it is, and may very well be. And that'll give the Javelin a little bit more strength, especially if these APS turrets get rebuilt to have some effect. You can see we're not getting anything done with them. The Kitakami, yeah, has lambs, so it's not like we're gonna get through anyway. But the Kitakami is also cheaper than the Javelin, not a huge amount cheaper, but she is cheaper, and we're not doing anything to her. Again, the Javelin, when you have a target that these missiles can work against, they can be very strong. So if you're not prepared for her, you can still get slapped, but something with even moderate flares will just absolutely destroy you. Let's delete these, and I'll show another way to beat the Javelin. So the other way to beat the Javelin that I usually don't recommend against huge missile vehicles, because usually in a fight between large ships, huge missiles are just sort of the be-all and end-all. That if you can hit something with huge missiles, there is nothing better that you can be doing. Although, just to some extent, CRAM cannons sort of fall into that same category. So the Bulwark, slightly more expensive than the Javelin. I believe the Javelin is slightly more expensive than this material cost is reporting. But The Bulwark, I think, has long been recognized as one of the worst godlies in the game. She's getting... Well, she's quite old, hasn't held up well, was not even good in her prime. She is getting a bit of a makeover. I saw someone post something in the Discord. I don't know if it'll ever go through or not, but whether or not it does, her CRAM cannons are getting rebuilt. And covering a ship like this with deck guns, for the same reason that the Caldera has some issues, well, the Bulwark will never be absolutely terrifying, but sort of... Actually, this is a bit better than the Javelin anyway. But with these rebuilt, she'll be a bit cheaper and have considerably more firepower. And while still not a fantastic vehicle, will be way stronger. Now, I'm not sure the Bulwark always wins this, but the test that I did, we'll turn our repair tentacles off. She did win. So first off, the Bulwark does not have flares, and her lambs are not strong enough to do basically anything. They can only pop very small shells. So this is just going to be a slugfest. They're just going to shoot back and forth. Currently, the Javelin is winning. And it looks like she's benefited reasonably well. Oh, that's... yeah, so this is a problem I've noticed before. These missiles get stuck sometimes. They usually come out anyway. So another thing you can do about these huge missiles to counter them is you can use what people call distraction sticks, where you have flares that are on cables and sort of hover above your craft. The Steel Striders love to do this. I usually don't do it because I find that missiles will often, when they go past the flare, they'll then see your craft, turn around and hit your craft. These huge missiles don't have a good enough turning radius. There's nothing they can do once they miss. Alright, so currently, very even fight. More issues these did eventually release, and they usually do. Sometimes they don't, though. But what should be apparent here is that the Bulwark is tanking way more damage, and it's still very even. You can see how bad this will be once the Bulwark gets rebuilt. And this fight can be a little bit volatile. If any damage is dealt with these huge missiles, this fight ends immediately. It looks like the Bulwark is actually going to lose this one, but I've seen it go the other way in the past. But this is a valid way to kill the Javelin. Usually, trying to go toe-to-toe and slugging it out with a huge missile vehicle is completely impossible. It does work against the Javelin. Although, actually, the Bulwark might get there just off of its torpedoes. One of the good things about the way that the Javelin is made is that at least these torpedoes aren't going to destroy the missiles. So, I'll spawn in one of my vehicles that has to slug it out with the Javelin. I think this might be getting a little bit close, too. It looks like these... Ooh, that's getting really close. The Javelin is kind of getting to the range. Yeah, I don't really know what's with this. I'll check her AI in a second. But I'll put in one of my vehicles that has to slug it out with the Javelin. So she just kind of rammed. I'm sort of curious as to what her AI is. Point it and maintain distance, combat distance 1500. So something's going wrong here. Hover movement. Now, I think that ships do not have a valid maneuver. So point at and remain, or so hover movement has an issue that when you use on-water pathfinding, let's actually see if the Javelin uses on-water pathfinding. Yep. It tries to use strafe movement to correct your course. and it expects your strafe movement to be very powerful. If you don't have it, you will never converge on a straight line with your path, no matter how you set up your AI and everything. It's completely impossible. For frontsiders, I do think that you have to use hover movement, because ship and tank movement will not recognize your facility to turn in place. So I think I'm still going to switch the Caldera to hover movement rather than ship and tank movement anyway, even though it makes her unable to drive in a straight line for long distances. And I'm going to go through a few of my other craft and tweak them, shifting some of them away from hover movement, shifting some of them to it. So they're hugging, let's destroy them. Bring the Javelin back in on my team. And what is going on here? Resting drive 0, pusher preset, main positive 1, forward 1. So I wasn't doing anything that should have been setting forward control. I don't know if there's a drive maintainer. There is, but the current value is 0, so I wouldn't expect that to do it. Controlling first stim drive. Current value is 0. Again, don't expect this to do it though. Okay, so the Javelin should back off if there's a close vehicle to her. I'm sort of curious about what's going on here. This is the sort of debugging that's always really hard to figure out, which I don't really plan on doing that much. Thrust direction forward. Current drive -1. I think we're trying to back off now. We're stuck in the gun barrels a little bit.
Moving now.
And we're trying to close again. Oh, wow. I didn't recognize that. There's no transmission gear in here. Right, there's no transmission gear, so this doesn't matter, right? So when you have a steam engine like this, you need to put in a transmission so that you can get varied power to your propeller. There is no transmission. I didn't even look for that. Well, that's interesting. That's mildly defective as well. Anyway, I'm gonna spawn in one of my vehicles that I don't think is phenomenal. I said that I think that she is a medium difficulty craft, even though she may really be a little bit too strong for medium difficulty craft. I'm gonna let the vehicle settle in the water a little bit as well. Alright. Here I have 2 calderas. I should have put them not on the player team, because this means that they won't despawn below 58% health. I don't think that that is going to become relevant. And 1 Javelin. Javelin almost exactly double the cost of 2 calderas. And although the caldera can be a fairly strong craft, I do think that she's fairly entry level as far as a craft is concerned. So I'm going to turn everything on and unpause So these first two shots are pretty important. Not the best hits. Popped one gun and sort of hit some unimportant armor on the side. And we are now taking fire. Did we lose anything important? Well, no, it doesn't look like it. We'll list a bit, but we can live without this stuff. Returning fire. Time fuse going off behind there, not a very good hit. It looks like we dealt a little bit of damage to some of the huge missiles, but not that much. The calderas will actually retreat. They do not have the same issue as the Javelin. Looks like we've still been unable to actually damage the huge missiles, which is pretty good for the Javelin. It will probably resurface here instead of despawning. 76, 93, 90. In previous tests, the Javelin has not tanked damage this well without the huge missiles going down. Oh, actually, and the Javelin will despawn very early to low health as well. It's kind of weird. But not a lot of armor to her. That's all that it took to force her to despawn. And the two calderas are still at fairly high health. The Javelin can knock these guns off fairly early if she gets a really lucky shot, but I haven't seen it happen before. And the stuff under the waterline is all empty. Which, like, the calderas could be way better protected than they are. They can take a hit to the front from a huge missile, but not very many, and not one to the side of these guns. So anyway, this is my overview of the Javelin, a craft that I hadn't been aware of until recently. And I actually have no idea when she was introduced to the game. I don't know if there's a way to tell when the new craft are being introduced. I was under the impression that there was a new series of ramming planes for the white flares, because I thought there'd been a contest to that effect at some point, and the new craft had been selected. If they're in the game, I haven't found them, or any history of when they're being released. I've asked before if they're patch notes for ships and that sort of thing, so that you know when they're introduced. And I think the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no, that I believe in the patch notes, sometimes I see ships, and sometimes ships just appear. But I could be wrong. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look into the Javelin, and I hope to see you in the future.